Hey Richard, are you familiar with vasovagal syncope?
Beg your pardon? What's that? Some sort of new tech that you're playing with?
No, it's what happens when you faint from seeing blood.
Ah, wow, okay, that's fairly random.
It's not actually. You see, today's guest looks at blood to help patients across all stages of cancer.
Good thing he doesn't have vasovagal, whatever it was that you said earlier.
Indeed. Today, we welcome Simranjit Singh to the TransformAsians podcast. Simranjit is the Chief Executive Officer at Guardant Health, a precision oncology company that's conquering cancer with data.
Simranjit and his team are transforming treatment for patients at all stages of cancer, enabling them to live longer and healthier lives. He's here now to tell us more.
Welcome to the TransformAsians podcast. Today, we have Simranjit Singh, CEO of Guardant Health with us, and he'll be talking to us about the kinds of transformations and changes he's been seeing in the healthcare industry over the last 20 years or so. Simran, can you tell us a little bit about your journey in healthcare and diagnostics, and what are the kind of key changes you've seen in the last 20 years?
Firstly, thank you for having me here. The healthcare industry has definitely transformed tremendously in the last 20 years. When I first started in the healthcare industry was the period where we just started understanding the human genome. The Human Genome Project had just completed. Was a massive undertaking, multiple different teams working on it, over billions and billions of dollars spent on being able to put together a human genome. At that point in time, there was a lot of hype and a lot of talk about the promise of human genome. We were talking about designer babies. We're talking about different aspects of how this is going to really change and transform lives. However, I think, as the hype cycle goes, there's lots of hype, and then there's a period of disillusion, and then you see real benefits and real use cases of that, and that's really where my journey started. I started at that start of that hype. When we were graduating from university, there was a lot of talk about biotech being the next growth engine here in Singapore. BioPlus was just coming up together. I remember sitting in a lecture theater where we had Philip Yeo came to the university, and I remember being in the lecture theater because he was advising all of us. We were all young life sciences graduates, biomedical sciences graduates, and he was telling all of us, it's like, oh, I'm building BioPlus, and this is going to be the next big thing for Singapore. It's going to be our hub for biosciences. But you might not have a place there if you don't go and do your PhD. And I remember his words very clearly. If you don't do your PhD, you will be washing test tubes in my lab.
Whoa.
and I was thinking to myself, if everybody is doing their PhD, who's actually going to be selling the product? If you're going to have all these discoveries, you're going to be transforming lives. If the product doesn't go to the market,
You're in trouble.
There's no use.
Very astute of you. Very
And
astute.
so I remember telling myself that, I'm not a lab rat, and that's not me. I like science. I like biomedical science. I like the fact that we are changing the world through the R&D that we are doing. But I don't think that's where I will be able to contribute most effectively.
Right.
And I felt that the need for commercialization and being able to bring this to the market was very important. And so that was my path to try and prove him wrong.
Okay.
Nicely done there.
So, but I mean, coming back to the healthcare industry, I think we've seen quite a number of different changes that have occurred, at least in the diagnostic space.
Right.
If you look at health screening, the massive changes that occurred was how you so easily, with a single blood draw, you were able to get different testing done or different tests.
Yep.
Right. In terms of, for example, in management of heart disease, the testing for LDL, HDL, triglycerides, all of that became a game changer because now you have early diagnostic markers that are able to make you think what are the changes you need to do in lifestyle interventions that you didn't know before.
So are you telling me 20 years ago we didn't do LDL and HDL and triglycerides?
We did, but it were all single tests that had to be done in the hospital.
Oh, wow.
Right. Now you have a panel and you bring
Yeah.
all of that together, all these tests with a huge menu card.
yeah.
You are now able to then have a sense of taking control
Yes.
of your health.
Yes.
And so this itself, I think, became an important sort of change. And if you take that even further, closer to the last period that we have seen in terms of COVID,
Yes.
if not for diagnostics, vaccine development, and treatment development and acceleration of that, which is all the knowledge that we have amassed in the last 20 years coming together in this time of need, we would never have been able to come out of it. Right?
Right.
These are the three things that brought us out of COVID.
Right.
Because we were able to get rapid tests done, diagnostics industry got a huge boost.
Yes.
If you look at the vaccines, mRNA was actually being used for cancer vaccines.
Yeah, right.
They were used for cancer treatments. They were then repurposed to look at infectious diseases.
Right.
But that technology would not have existed if not for that R&D, right? And so those are things that in the last 20 years have occurred. And then if you look at treatments, that's even broader. And you're seeing new classes of drugs. I mean, in my area of expertise, in oncology, you see the real benefit of having therapies that are targeted, that are helping patients because it increases response rates, improves overall survival. And all of that, you have seen only in the last 20 years. The first targeted therapy came out in 2003.
Wow.
So it's been literally 20 years.
Yeah, right. Okay. And you were talking about your moment with Philip Yeo.
Yes.
And seeing an opportunity. Something else that I wanted to ask you about a little bit is that you're also quite a diverse entrepreneur as well, and you're involved in kind of things as diverse as movie making to data analytics. Tell us a little bit about that as well for you. What is it that's driving that?
Sure. So, I mean, I think when I was in the university, I was involved in a program called the NUS Overseas College Program. That was the first time that program was launched.
Right.
I was part of the first batch
Right.
that went on that program. There was a batch that went to Silicon Valley, and I went to Bio Valley, which was the tri-state of Philadelphia, New Jersey, and Delaware. Right. So I was based in University of Pennsylvania. We did some entrepreneurship courses there, and you also worked in a startup. So you're supposed to do an entire semester in a startup.
Right.
And so that was my first foray, I would say, literally into a biotech startup.
Right.
Right. So you were exposed to fundraising. How do you go and pitch in front of VCs? How do you put together a business plan? How do you look at commercialization of your product? How you succinctly be able to describe that product to investors as well as to the man on the street, so that they will be able to understand what you're trying to do. So that sort of maybe implanted the seed of entrepreneurship, I guess,
I understand.
at that point in time.
Yeah.
And so I was involved in lots of startup competitions after that.
Right.
So my first startup was a diagnostic startup.
Okay.
And I remember starting it in when I was in University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. I remember my dad putting in quite a significant sum of money.
That sounds stressful.
Which he does remind me still today. And we just put the startup together, and then came to Singapore and won Startup Singapore competition and the Lee Kuan Yew business plan competition at that point in time. But you don't know what you don't know at that point in time. You're a new graduate. You don't know how to run a business. You don't know what needs to be done in terms of standing up the IP, and so you go through the entire process. And so that experience, I mean, obviously I lost a lot of that money, gained a tremendous amount of experience. Don't know whether it
Worth every penny,
justifies
man. Worth every penny.
that experience, but nonetheless, I mean, I think it gave me an exposure that startup is hard, but you need to be able to find the right mentors, and that was something that we didn't have at that point in time.
Yeah.
If you ask me what I would redo if I was in that position, I would go and find a mentor. I would find somebody who's already in the
Interesting.
industry
Okay.
and who has already done it,
Yeah.
and to be able to guide me.
Yes.
So that comes back to your question. So why do I invest? I invest because now I feel that I have gained that knowledge.
Right.
I have been involved in business. I've been involved in different aspects of it in the corporate life, in terms of running and executing the business, and then now starting up with Guardant and in the region. When it was first started in 2018, it was a brand new startup, and so I felt that knowledge now can be passed on to other startup
Fair enough.
founders.
Yeah, yeah.
And I have the ability to be able to guide some of their business decisions, be able to look at some nifty technology, and then I think it's also a bit of passion, right? Movie making is definitely a passion. You don't make money from any movie that you make. I mean, I think it's more to be able to tell right stories.
Yes.
Right? It goes back to something that I hold quite dearly, which is a Japanese concept called ikigai,
Yes.
right? Which is a sort of an intersection of passion, purpose, and what is valued in the world.
Right.
And so I use that quite a bit in terms of
Yes.
everything that I do. That if I'm doing something, it must be something that I'm deeply passionate about. It must be something that I think is purposeful. It's going to impact lives. It's going to impact the way people are thinking. It's going to change certain preconceived notions. And it's going to be valued. That means not only now, but it will leave a legacy, or it will be something that people will think about
Fantastic.
in the future.
Yeah.
So I think that would probably be concepts that I would hope that other entrepreneurs and founders of startups would think about when they're building up their startups.
Excellent. Thank you. So you've been running Guardant across Asia, I think the Middle East, and even Africa for the last 4 or 5 years now. Could you tell us a little bit about Guardant's mission and what's the kind of change that you guys are hoping to drive across society?
Sure. So Guardant Health started with two founders in the US in 2013. And it started with a vision of being able to conquer cancer with data. And using proprietary diagnostic tests that will be able to then bend mortality curves and cost curves in cancer. Our first product that was put together was in 2014. It was the first blood-based liquid biopsy, which is now a term that is coined globally and understand. At that point in time, nobody understood what the hell it was, but it was something that we had to educate, right?
Yes.
And the reason was very simply because the traditional way of being able to look at diagnosing and more importantly, looking at profiling or doing a genomic profiling of the cancer was to take a piece of tissue, right, from the tumor site, and then being able to look at what are the mutations that are driving that cancer. However, that's an invasive process. And so the disruption came when we were able to look at, hey, there is already circulating tumor DNA in the blood. And we should be able to get and look at that circulating tumor DNA and be able to do the same. And that will be less invasive. You don't need to go in and do an invasive tissue biopsy.
Yeah.
You just need to do a simple blood draw. So I think that premise was how the founders came out about it. They met me, or I met them, after I had a cancer scare in 2017. And so in 2017, I remember going through an invasive tissue biopsy.
Yes.
They had to take a portion from my throat, and then soon after, I had complications from that biopsy.
Yes.
I had a blood clot in the throat, had profuse bleeding. I remember coming down the lift of my apartment, and my neighbor came into the lift, and he said to me, "Oh, Mr. Singh, what happened to you? What did your wife do to you?" Oh, God. I don't know how he came to that conclusion. But nonetheless, I mean, I remember that because I was bleeding profusely, and this guy was taking a mickey out of me. but when when that call came from those founders, and I was already involved in a lot of development work in oncology, and so the founders were looking at doing a clinical trial in the region, and I used to be doing a lot of clinical trials for others. And so when they spoke to me about this technology, hey, we're going to be able to look at detecting tumor DNA in the blood, in 10 milliliters of blood, I actually said, science fiction. It can't be done. How can you find 5 nanograms of tumor DNA in 10 milliliters of blood?
Right.
And you're going to be able to do not only finding it, you're going to then be able to do genomic profiling on it. I said that's can't be done.
Right.
And so when I found out about it and I looked at the technology and gained more knowledge about it and understood how it's being done, and it's a combination of different things. We have obviously the extraction of the tumor DNA, which is proprietary, and we are able to get a high amount of tumor DNA, close to 80 to 90%. And then we have next generation sequencing. So take it like a Xerox machine,
Yes.
right? We've got all these tumor fragments, and you're taking all the photocopies of them, all the different 3.8 billion permutations. How do you find all of that 3.8 billion permutation? You're looking at a fragment.
Yes.
And so then you need to be able to use a back-end machine learning AI, which is now becoming so widely used, but we had already incorporated it into the technology stack at that point in time, because there was no way to be able to look at that fragments.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we are now able to detect that and put that together into that technology. So that forms our the fundamental part of our technology, which is digital sequencing, using the AI and the sequencing power that we have to be able to find the mutations that are driving the cancer.
Yes. What interests me really here is the way that you talk about technology, because the way that you talk about it is I think quite different to the way that a lot of people think about tech,
Right.
Which is kind of on their phone, or it's hardware or kind of software or whatever. But you talk about tech from clearly very much a science perspective, which is quite different.
Right. So I think it's a combination of everything, right? I mean, I'm looking at it based on the critical steps that are part and parcel of that technology. But that technology is also driven by the software. The algorithm is the software, right? So we are looking at and enabling us with the power of computing to be able to find these mutations at a rapid amount of speed with a great amount of accuracy.
Right.
Then it's about being able to then provide that information to the physicians, right? And so that's being done through a report that's being auto-generated. It's being sent to them using technology. They have a portal. They are able to look at the visualizations. They're able to look at what are the types of mutations that are driving that cancer. They are able to look at what is the frequency of that particular mutation itself. And why is that important? Because if you're doing an intervention, you're providing a drug, you're looking at the frequency. Is it coming down? Is that alterations going away?
Right.
So you know that the patient is responding to the treatment.
Yes.
So the way I liken our technology to be like the GPS for oncology, right? Because we are able to then guide the doctor in terms of treatment selection for the patient.
I understand.
And so in essence, it is still putting that power in the hands of the doctor.
Yes.
But obviously the back end is tremendous amount of science.
You're right.
Fascinating.
Okay.
So in
Amazing.
simple terms, all of these developments in oncology and the diagnostics and the testing that you guys are doing, how would that impact a patient's life? Like what kind of impact will that have?
So that was something that we looked at, that there's an entire continuum of cancer, right? A lot of what we have started off with is in advanced cancer,
Okay.
right? Where it's about treatment selection for patients who are in stage 3, stage 4 cancers. Their time to treatment is critical for them. So they need to be able to get the information very quickly. So we are able to get that information to them in 7 days turnaround time, which is the fastest in industry. And the doctor is able to make a decision. But a large chunk of patients are actually cancer survivors, right? So they are those that are in stage 1, stage 2 cancers. They've done a resection. their anxiety is whether their cancer is going to come back.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's where we've moved from advanced cancer, we moved to recurrence monitoring.
Yes.
So now we have a test 2 weeks after them having a surgical resection. We are able to detect whether there's still tumor DNA. And if there's still tumor DNA, there's a high prognostic value, a positive prognostic value that they will have a cancer recurrence. And so there's a need for them to be on specific therapy or increased surveillance. And then we go back to our mission, which was to bend mortality curves. The only way you're going to be doing it is you need to be able to detect when when cancer is at the earliest and treatable, and that's early detection.
Right.
And so we've just launched a test initially in colorectal cancer that is able to detect when the cancer is in initial stages, so stage 1, stage 2 cancers, and you are able to then go in with some sort of intervention that could be curative in nature.
Wow.
And so that's the whole intention, that we start with colorectal cancer, but to then make it pan-cancer. And so when we do that, I think we will then really transform the way cancer care is, because you're going to be able to detect it early and be able to treat it early.
Yeah, I've never heard that phrase before, pan-cancer. So that means right across
All tumor types, specifically solid tumors.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Lovely. So you've explained how your entire process is built around all these kinds of different types of technologies. What kind of challenges do you reckon you guys have faced in trying to drive not just adoption, but in terms of medical approvals and stuff like that needs to get done before you can actually bring this to market?
Yeah. Challenges are many and plenty across from firstly finding the right talent to be part of the team, who understand this technology, who is able to look at the R&D and facilitate the fast-growing environment that we are in, to then the stakeholders, the oncologists. Many of the oncologists in their entire course of learning, especially those who have been there for quite some time. In the past, these are all new phenomena. These are all new technologies that have just come in place.
Yes.
So a lot of the coursework that they did in terms of genomics was very limited at that point in time. It was just a scope of the fact that we didn't know what we knew now at that point in time.
Yeah.
And so so there's a lot of education that is required. So we work very closely with oncologists to let them know and keep them abreast of all these changes in technology. So that helps in terms of adoptions, right? So you need to be able to build up the KOLs. You need to be able to build up the knowledge base of those who are skeptical about this technology, right? I was skeptical about it too. I mean, and then I understood about the technology and how it works, and so that's something that we do quite often. Then it's about the patients and the caregivers and the broader community. I mean, I think there's a need for us to also educate and provide information. But the biggest challenge, I would say, after aviation, healthcare is the second most regulated industry in the world.
I'm not surprised.
Interesting. Okay.
And so there's a need to then educate regulators.
Yes.
And regulators, have been very much set in different sort of types of healthcare interventions.
Okay.
So pharmaceuticals,
Yep.
diagnostics, medical device.
Right.
If you have something that is a combination of the three, then what do you do?
Yes.
How do you categorize? Right. So we have technology, we have software, we have diagnostics, we have biochemistry. Which category do you put it under?
Yes.
And so there is a lot of work to first help them define what we are doing, help them understand what are the technologies that are coming together, and then help them to create a pathway for regulatory approval. So in the US, I give you an example. In the US, we are considered as NGS IVD. So NGS is next generation sequencing.
Okay.
IVD is in vitro diagnostics. So that means it's taking a blood test or something from the body out in vitro. In Japan, we are classified as a medical device software.
My goodness.
And so this happens in many different jurisdictions.
Yeah.
They classify us with whatever they understand us as.
Yeah.
And then we have to navigate and be able to provide them with the information.
Wow. Okay.
So that's something that we've been doing consistently now in different markets to educate the regulator that, hey, this is what we are. These are the different technology subtypes. And then to tell them that, hey, this is some pathways that people have already regulated us, and then give them benchmarks about that. So that has taken some time. But we are happy that many of the regulators are coming around. We've got our US FDA approval. We were the first to get US FDA approval in 2020. We were one of the first to get PMDA approval, which is in Japan as a medical device software. We are also very pleased that just very recently, in a couple of weeks ago, we got our first regulatory approval here in Singapore.
Congrats, man.
And this is amazing because we are the first blood-based test to be approved for next generation sequencing for comprehensive genomic profiling, and this is even before tissue tests. And so there's been a lot of work that was been done to educate the regulator to be able to understand our technology, and also kudos to the HSA to be able to bring these technologies and approve these technologies so that patients can benefit from it.
Yeah.
So I could go to a hospital now and order one of these blood tests.
Yeah, so at this, you could have already ordered because a lot of these are lab developed tests,
Right.
And so they are already available in the cancer institutes, the government cancer institute, NCCS and NCI, as well as many of the other private clinics. But the approval is more to be able to provide the credibility and also to create the pathways, because we think these tests we're going to have many tests in our portfolio, and we want to be able to create pathways for them to be approved, right? Because it provides the credibility, it provides a stamp of approval, it gives patient confidence as well. And so that's something that we want to make sure that we are not diminishing the quality of tests. And so by having these approval pathways, there's going to be a quality standard. So if anybody wants to come in and provide a test, at least they must meet those minimum quality standards.
Right. So you're almost like the guinea pig to a certain extent.
I wouldn't call ourselves guinea pig. I'll call ourselves the pioneers or the stewards of the industry.
Fair enough.
Because for us, it's about also doing the right thing for the patient, and also being able to provide more knowledge about the technology, right? It's new, so somebody has to take that step. And so we're happy to do that first.
That's one of the great things about these conversations that we're having. We're talking to a lot of pioneers, and it's fascinating. The point that you made before about just so for all of our listeners and viewers, that idea of bending the curve. Which curve are you talking about?
So the two curves that we look very closely at is mortality curves. So if you look at Singapore in context, 1 in 3 Singaporeans at some point in their life will have cancer.
1 in 3.
1 in 3.
My goodness.
And if you look globally, cancer is the highest mortality in over 110 countries. And just in 2020 alone, I think there were 10 million cancer deaths altogether. So it is one that we want to be able to change the burden of disease.
Right.
And if we are looking at the current ways of doing it, we are only treating the disease right at the end stages of the disease, where it's very difficult to treat. I mean, you have certain extension of quality of life or an extension of survival, but you're not really going in with curative intent of the disease. You're just managing the disease.
Understood, yeah.
And the only way you're going to be able to look at that is if you're getting it early. And so that's something that we thought really intently about, that we need to be able to find a test that is able to detect cancer when it is in the development stages, right? It is still maybe even pre-cancer. It's not even developed into tumor yet. So, but the problem is that if it's not developed into tumor, there's no shedding of tumor DNA. So how do you do it?
Right.
How do you actually detect it?
Yes.
So you need to be able to get markers that are even before the genomic changes are occurring.
Wow.
So in scientifically, it's epigenomics.
Right.
So it's the precursor to the genomic changes or DNA changes that occurs. And so we are able to use this really powerful tool to look at these epigenomics and be able to then detect these cancers early. So we did a large 20,000 subject study in the US in colorectal cancer. And we were able to get a test that has a sensitivity of 83% and a specificity of 90%.
Wow.
And so this is the first of its kind in that with that level of sensitivity as a blood-based test. And so we are very, very thrilled with that results, and we are now submitted that for FDA approval. So we are now looking, and as I go back to educating the regulators across. Even in the US, to say that, hey, this should be a pathway that we have for early detection. The regulators are more sensitive because early detection means you are looking at healthy patients, asymptomatic, but they have a specific risk or early onset of that cancer.
Yes.
So they are more sensitive about it. The bar is much higher.
Yes.
Right. So we understand that, and that's why we are building up the evidence for that. That's why we did this large 20,000 study, and then that platform we've also seen that it can be optimized for, like I said, pan cancer, so multiple different cancers, and so that's what we are doing right now, looking at different cancer types. We've started another study on lung cancer. We're moving on to other cancer types, and so we hope very soon. We'll be able to launch a multi-cancer test, and that will change the way cancer is looked at. In colorectal cancer, for example, in our region, just looking at Singapore alone, one of the studies, I think it's the Lancet study, if I'm not wrong, said that Singapore had one of the lowest rates of colorectal cancer screening, close to about only 27%.
God.
And the reason is very simple, because people get all of these stool tests. You go for a healthcare screening, they give you a sort of a vial that you have to get a stool sample.
Yes.
Many don't give the stool sample.
Oh, really?
Right, because they feel it's disgusting.
Yes.
There's a huge disgust factor.
Yes.
There's a factor that you have to give it 2 times.
Yes.
Or you can't go on call.
Yes.
You're in the
Sure.
clinic and you can't give the sample.
Yeah.
So there's inconvenience.
Yeah.
And the other alternative is a invasive colonoscopy.
Right.
You have to do a prep for that.
Nobody
That
wants
means
to do that.
one day of prep,
Yes.
1 day of procedure,
Yes.
1 day of recovery. So
Yes.
3 days gone in terms of that entire process. So that's one of the reasons why there's all these barriers of the modalities that are currently available. Colonoscopy is great. If you're doing it, it's great. You should be doing it. But the point is that people are not doing it. And so the best test is the test that gets done.
Yes.
If you're going to be able to get a blood sample, and that test is going to get done.
Yeah.
I mean, we looked at it in real world setting. Close to 90% people give their blood.
Yes.
Or even in excess of 90%.
Yes.
And so if you are going to be able to do that in the clinic setting, you're going to get higher compliance rates.
Yeah.
And so that will increase the rate of screening in of cancer types.
Right.
And we started with colorectal cancer, but we believe that this will be applicable pan cancer.
Gosh, wow. And the other thing I wanted to ask you a little bit about is you're clearly innovating and transforming almost more than an industry, but by the sounds of things. What sort of things are you learning about what it takes to really make change? You know what I mean? What are the lessons that are coming out of the change that you're making?
I mean, I can probably crystallize it into 3 things. Right. One is we are learning that there's a need to also manage the pace of change.
Right.
Right.
That's interesting.
Because you can't bring everything in at once.
Right.
Yep.
Right. There's going to be a pushback of an understanding, the knowledge, also the intent of why you're bringing all these into the market. So there's a need to pace it out as well, and so that's something that we've sort of been mindful of. How do we launch our products? When do we launch them? How do we bring in the different stakeholders, the oncologists, the regulators, the patients, and be able to provide the education that is required before we launch those products. So I think that's number 1. Number 2 is you can't do it alone.
Right.
You need to always bring in the entire oncology community,
Right.
and that's the oncologists, the patients, caregivers,
Yes.
biopharma companies
Right.
who are producing the drugs,
Yes.
other diagnostic companies, associations, regulators. So we do that. We try and make sure that we bring in a lot of thought leadership. We bring in a lot of them coming together to have open dialogue with each other. We understand what the patient journey looks like, and so that everybody is looking at the patient journey.
Yep.
We work with biopharma companies because they're developing innovative drugs, and they need genomic markers or genomic tests for their genomic markers, which their drugs are targeting. And so all of that comes together through that dialogue. I think the third thing that is required is resilience. You need to be able to understand that there's going to be lots of naysayers.
Yeah.
Right.
There's going to be people who don't understand the technology. There are people who are going to be able to look at it and say that, hey, this is going to impact the entire healthcare burden itself because of the spend that is required. And so there's a need to educate. I mean, diagnostics, for example, is less than 2% of the entire cost of cancer. The bulk of it is in the treatments.
Right.
The bulk of it is in managing the disease.
Yes.
But if you're going in blind, you might be actually spending much more.
Yeah.
If you have a diagnostic test that can navigate that much better for you, you're selecting treatments that are more effective. The wastage that you have in terms of trial and error is taken away and eliminated. But that takes time. That takes a lot of time in terms of educating, being able to provide that convincing arguments, being able to put together the health economic benefit. And so there's a need for resilience. There's a need for us to understand that, who are we doing it for? We're doing it for the patients. The patients are, can be anyone, can be a member of our family.
Absolutely.
And so that's what we are fighting for.
Yeah. Fascinating, really fascinating. I think there's so much interesting stuff.
You could go on and on, man. I'm fascinated. But let me just try to close off with the final question. You've been you guys are pushing through so much change and innovation. Personally, do you get to a point where you feel you've done enough? What is it that keeps driving you towards, challenging the norms that you've been involved in?
I mean, I think the fact that the burden of disease is so great, nothing you do is enough, right? You cannot alleviate the pain and the suffering that many of these cancer patients go through and their families go through, right? Just looking at that is a constant reminder. In our office, there's a big mural, 200-odd slabs, that was put together by a stage 4 breast cancer survivor. This was when we launched the office in 2018. And she put this together and she donated it to us. She named it The Journey of Hope. Every day I see it, I look at it and I say to myself that, hey, it's not done. This journey of hope is still being undertaken by many of these cancer patients. And, we are part of that journey. We are trying to help them to navigate this journey. And so, I don't think that job is done until we are able to totally eradicate the disease or be able to manage that disease in an effective manner.
Very, very interesting, yeah. The journey of hope. So, Simran, that's been an incredible discussion. There's so many amazing points to take out of it. I think you're talking about the concept of ikigai, which you mentioned was passion, finding an area with passion, finding an area with purpose, and something that really brings value. That's a really, really wonderful concept. I also thought when you were talking about the importance of making change, you talked about the need for resilience, keeping going through that journey, the importance of bringing the community with you, and that thinking around timing and getting that right. Those were really, really wonderful points. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. For me, I thought how you talked about the 20 years and how it took when you were not, I wouldn't use the word disillusion. I think you were in disbelief when you first heard about how this was going to work with technology. But it's taken 20 years from inception to getting it to commercialization. So that, overnight success that took 20 years is really something that people need to remember, that you don't just get an overnight success overnight. It takes 20 years of hard work, commercialization, and learning about the market to really make something a success. So thank you for that insight as well. And for the rest of you, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you in our next episode. But in the meantime, remember to like and subscribe, so we'll catch you again soon. Thank you, and bye-bye.